That's a very good question. And the simple answer is everybody is responsible for protecting user data. Now, but of course, that's an overly simplistic response. I'm going to take just a little bit of time to just explain it. Now, the reason is that the when we say user data, of course, user data has to be generated from somewhere. So every user data is almost specific to the domain, the environment where it is generated. So you cannot, for example, expect that the Nigerian, let's say federal government, knows that Zoom is generating some form of data from this call, right? Or maybe the firm. So to say that they should come and protect it is going to be a big deal. So which is why it is important that Zoom as the platform that this conversation has some form of data protection mechanisms and controls built into their system. Now, when you now leave Zoom, you come to excuse me. When you leave Zoom, you then come to the fact. Now, the question is, should we now also say that if, for example, you said that, oh, we want to be able to download this video, we want to say that Zoom should now also come and protect how you use that video or where you store that video. They also know, which means that the firm also needs to ensure that this video is going to be safe, that there are mechanisms in place as that video will be processed, stored, or archived. So I just use that to paint the situation that the different people within the value chain have responsibilities with respect to protection of the personal data. However, we can take the conversation a little bit into the policy level and look at if we were to look at the overarching responsibility about protection of data, who should be responsible? And I'll say that from a governmental point of view, the answer should be that government should have the overall responsibility to enforce protection and define some baseline for what data protection really means. And that's they've done really in terms of like the regulations, the laws have happened. For example, if you look at the central bank, there's a central bank regulation on open banking, and that provides for the benchmark for how the different stakeholders within the open banking space should treat data within their domain. So that is an example of protection. There is also the FCCPC as well that says that before you can give you the digital lending license, you must have the NDP certificate, which presumes that you have a basic level of data protection mechanisms in place. And there's the NDPC itself enforcing the NDPA, right? And this is done again by saying you have to register with us, you have to file your annual audits, and in these audits, they ask you a few questions and all of that. So, but that is at the macro level. At the micro level, at the everyday level, the different people who come in contact with the user data, the personal data, must be responsible for protection of this data. And we can even break it down into like subunits, even at the micro level. So, for example, within an organization, right, whilst the overarching, again, responsibility for protecting personal data within an organization has to rest with the organization, because when you say data controller, data processor, the doctrine of the doctrine of agency comes to play, because if an employee is acting on behalf of a company, then the deeds of that employee, of course, within the bounds allowed by law, is deemed to be done by that organization. So, but does it now mean that the organization can act by itself? The answer is no, which means that even at the organization level, there has to still be controls to ensure that you still protect personal data that comes within your domain. So, for instance, if this video is going to be recorded and stored within the organization, who can have access to it? Who needs to have access to it? If, assuming this was a client counseling session, should everybody have access to that kind of video? The answer might be no, depending on the risk level, the risk rating that's been assigned to it. So what I'm saying in essence is that there is no one size fits all response to that question. You have to look at it in the different domains and the different stakeholders that exist within the data protection value chain. So at the macro level, of course, the government has to have a high level of supervisory or supervening power over ensuring that the privacy rights of everybody is protected, personal data is protected. The government can help to define standards, define baseline measures that that need to be deployed by organizations. And then at the organizational level, there also has to be like baseline measures that you also need to define. So you need to say who has access to this? Are we doing a need-based access control? Are we doing a least privilege? What exactly is it that you're trying to do that you need to do to ensure that personal data doesn't get in the hands of people who don't need it? Then what security measures do you also want to put in place at the organization level? So encryption, anonymization, pseudonymization, all these things will come into place. And then you also want to look at how you also respond when maybe there's a data subject access request, because what people think about when they talk about protection of data is usually limited to, oh, we need to encrypt this data, or we need to anonymize it, or we need to ensure that only people who need it have access to it. But the reality is that protection of data is not complete without protection of the rights or ensuring the rights of the data subject. And that is why the organization needs to define who is responsible for that and how do you ensure that that right is always enforced at every point in time. So, and this is where you now have like DPOs, and different stakeholders that are responsible for it. So to summarize, who should be responsible for protecting personal data? And I'll say that it depends on the domain that we are examining. At the macro level, the government; at the micro level, the organizations and the stakeholders within the organizations. Thank you.